I finally flew on Harbour Air. Based in Richmond, British Columbia, Harbour Air Seaplanes is perhaps one of the most well-known seaplane operators in Canada. They're actually the largest seaplane airline in North America and operate a fleet of de Havilland Beavers, Turbine Otters, Twin Otters, and Cessna Caravans. Founded in 1982, they now have over 40 aircraft in the fleet, serving a number of British Columbia's coastal communities and even an international service to Seattle. Given the challenging landscape along the BC coast, seaplanes are a natural fit in this part of the country, and Harbour Air alone flies an average of 500,000 passengers a year. Now, in the past far too many years of making aviation-related YouTube videos, Harbour Air is by far the most requested airline I get. Being relatively close to home, they are an airline I should have flown on a long time ago, but I just hadn't found the right time. In August of last year, though, I finally fixed that and was able to give one of Canada's most unique airlines a proper try. So, I made my way here to Vancouver Harbour Flight Centre on this gorgeous summer morning to grab a flight over to Victoria. Located right here in downtown Vancouver, the Vancouver Harbour Flight Centre Seaplane Terminal opened in 2011, though the area in Cole Harbour has been used for seaplane operations for decades. Prior to its opening, Vancouver seaplane operators had been using various temporary docks around Cole Harbour, and this new terminal was proposed as a permanent solution. It's used today by Sea Air Seaplanes and the Harbour Air Group, which includes Harbour Air, Whistler Air, and Salt Spring Air. Vancouver Harbour itself is the busiest water aerodrome in Canada, with just shy of 50,000 takeoffs and landings here in 2022. Because of that, it is also the only controlled water aerodrome in the country, which also happens to be home to the tallest air traffic control tower in the world. Located on top of the Granville Square building, the tower cap sits at a height of 142 meters, or 465 feet above the water, taller than any other control tower in existence. Some might disqualify it from really holding that distinction because it isn't a freestanding structure of its own, but I still think it counts. Now, admittedly, part of the novelty here for me is that I'm far more familiar with airplanes that have wheels, but this entire operation here for both pilots and air traffic control is fascinating. That, plus the famous floating chevron station in the distance for boats and the gorgeous scenery around, makes this by far one of the coolest airports in the country. After admiring the view for a bit in the morning sun, it was time I headed inside to check in for the flight. Harbour Air's part of the terminal here has a nice large waiting area and their check-in desks along the western wall. There, it was a short lineup to get checked in, which went alongside plenty of Harbour Air merchandise. I showed my ID, my bag was weighed, and I got my boarding pass for today's flight. Interestingly, Harbour Air uses these reusable boarding passes, which get collected as you walk down to the plane. What a cool touch! While checking in, I also asked which plane we were flying on specifically, and found out our plane for today would be this nearly 64-year-old de Havilland Canada DHC-3 Turbine Otter, registered as Charlie Golf Oscar Papa Papa. As you can imagine, this plane, serial number 355, is full of history, and started out with the US Army in 1960. It was then bought by the Government of Ontario in 1976, and flown by the Ontario Provincial Police, hence the registration. It bounced around a few more operators from 1985 onwards, flying in both Canada and Australia, and was later sold to Ketchikan Air Services in 1993. That same year, it was converted to a turbine, and flew in Alaska until 1997, when it was purchased by Harbour Air, and the registration reverted to its original Canadian one. 27 years later, and serial number 355 is still with Harbour Air doing what it does best. Back in the terminal, Harbour Air also offers complimentary coffee and tea if you're flying with them, and there is also some food for purchase here. The waiting area is very nice too, and with these proper chairs, it's pretty comfy. I also like the collection of Harbour Air umbrellas just in front of the door, should the weather take a turn for the worse. Eventually, boarding for Flight 2019 was called, and we made our way down to the docks. Now, the Otter is a single-pilot plane, and as we were walking out there, I asked our pilot if there was any chance of sitting up front in the co-pilot seat. Fortunately, they said yes, and so I made a beeline right away for the best seat in the house, or plane, I guess. Harbour Air's Otters seat up to 14 passengers, including this seat, which obviously does not have any accessible controls on this side. There is still plenty of room here for this short flight. There's a pair of David Clarks on the wall behind you, plus a literature pocket on the door, and of course a perfect panoramic view out the front. It's also super cool to see the older de Havilland branding alongside the screens. Just sitting here, you'd have no idea this plane was 64 years old. With everyone on board, the safety video started playing on the pilot's iPad on the wall behind me, with one point that I could certainly appreciate.
The portable electronic devices must be off for an airplane. Feel free to use your device for taking pictures.
With that single Pratt Whitney PT6 started up, here's the departure from Vancouver Harbour, off of run, taking off to the northwest. Well, passing over the Lionsgate Bridge like that was unlike anything I've experienced on an airline flight. As far as the weather goes, it could not have been a better day for this, and we got a great view of the shoreline flying past West Vancouver's high-rises. Our routing today took us westbound at first towards the mouth of Burrard Inlet, staying away from the busier airspace over YVR. On our way out, we passed a few of the many ships waiting to get into Vancouver Harbour, and as we approached the Strait of Georgia, the views of Howe Sound and the mountains in the distance were just gorgeous. Keep in mind, I've flown this route a bunch of times on airliners only, so these were brand new views I was seeing. We continued westbound a little bit more, passing over Bowen Island and getting some more great views of the trees below, before making a southbound turn towards Victoria. That other otter that took off just before us was still visible too, but heading to Nanaimo instead, further north on Vancouver Island. After leaving the busyness of Vancouver though, having the whole Strait of Georgia in front of you at 1,500 feet is quite the sight. With nothing but water for a few minutes, here's a look at the contents of that literature pocket. In here, Harbour Air had the safety card for the Otter, and this pamphlet showing their route map and a bit more about the company and its programs. They also had this reserved card here for the seat, which I'm sure is occasionally occupied for operational reasons, as well as an air sickness bag. Other than that, the real treat of sitting up here is getting to watch everything happen firsthand, and also hear it all through the headset. Of course, in what seems like much busier airspace than at home, I knew better than to say much while we were flying. There are not that many airline operations where you can get this kind of view though, so you can imagine I was just having the time of my life. After maybe 10 minutes or so, the coastline of Vancouver Island was just visible in the distance. That also meant we were approaching the Southern Gulf Islands, a collection of hundreds of islands with about a dozen major ones. These are always some of my favorite sights when I'm flying this route, so I think I'll shut up for a bit and let the views speak for themselves. After reaching Vancouver Island itself, we actually flew right over top of Victoria International Airport and got a great view of YYJ and its runways. What felt like, all too soon, the city of Victoria was visible in the distance, as were the Olympic Mountains across the border in Washington state. We passed just west of the city before turning over the water to approach the harbor from the south. Victoria's Inner Harbour Airport is arguably even more exciting than Vancouver Harbour, since their harbour is quite a bit narrower. That makes for, again, a beautiful approach, and here's the arrival into Victoria Harbour, landing to the east. So that was Harbour Air, and having flown between Vancouver and Victoria plenty of times the usual way, I can pretty confidently say this is a much better way to do it. This was a fantastic experience, not just for the aviation geek element of riding up front, but also for the convenience that Harbour Air offers. Being able to go from downtown to downtown is a huge time saver compared to going through YVR and YYJ. Plus, it is one of the best ways to see some of the natural beauty of this part of the world, and again, today could not have been a better day for it. My only regret is that it took me this long to see what a cool operation this is. I will absolutely be back to fly on more of Harbour Air's fleet in the future. Thanks so much for watching this short trip with Harbour Air, and I will see you next time.